Welcome back to Hardball. The Supreme Court will take up a case that will test the limits of First Amendment rights. Should an anti-gay group be allowed to protest at the funerals of fallen soldiers? Al Snyder's son, Matthew, was killed while serving in Iraq in 2006. At the burial ceremony at his church, protesters held signs like these. The group claims that the death of U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan is God's punishment for America's tolerance of homosexuality. Now, just to give you an idea of who we're talking about here, I interviewed the lead protester, Fred Phelps, back in 2006. Take a look at this.
God's wrath is upon this nation, and he's pouring out that wrath by killing these soldiers and maiming these soldiers on Iraq and sending them back in body bags.
States
it is a
today,
very serious
a result
crime
of the same
against
policy?
God Almighty for this nation to say that it's okay to be gay, and that's the straits that we're falling upon.
Ooh.
As it was in the days of Lot.
I'm having a Rod Serling moment
drank,
here,
they bought,
sir.
They sold, they planted,
Joining
they
me
built
now. All right,
but
enough
the
of
same
you.
Day Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone.
Cut his microphone. I've heard enough of this guy with the fiery eyes. Enough of him. Joining me now is Al Snyder, who took the protesters to court. Now, he won, and then a federal appellate court dismissed the case on First Amendment grounds. Now, the United States Supreme Court will hear the case. Please accept our condolences on the passing of your son, who was an American hero.
Thank you, Michael.
Set the stage for us. It's 2006. You're preparing to bury your boy, and all of a sudden you learn that these folks, these clowns from this church, are going to show up. How far in advance of the funeral did you know that they were coming?
I found out the day before the funeral that they were coming. They sent out notices to media and to emergency, like the police and fire and sheriff's department.
And we should make it clear, Mr. Snyder, that your son had absolutely nothing to do with this group, their cause. They just singled him out because of their cockamamie theory as to what drives war deaths.
That is correct.
On the day of the funeral itself, how far were they protesting from the public access or entrance to the church grounds?
They positioned themselves probably between 25 and 30 feet away from one of the main vehicle entrances of the church, Chris.
In the funeral procession, did you take pains, did you take care to try and stage your placement in the car so that Matthew's mother and sisters wouldn't have to see what you saw?
Yes, basically, when we got into the limousine, I put myself facing the back of the limousine with my two daughters up against the window on the sides so that their back would be against them.
What did you see as you looked out those windows?
Well, basically, Chris, I saw a glimpse of the signs as we neared the church. I didn't see what the signs said at that point. They were a little bit too far away.
You later learned the content of some of those signs. What did you learn were on those signs at your son's funeral?
Well, they were holding one sign probably about 30 feet away from the main entrance that depicted two men having anal intercourse. They held signs that the Pope's in hell, thank God for dead soldiers, Semper Fi fags. It was pretty rough.
And Mr. Snyder, part of their warped thinking, sir, also extends to what they perceive to be the cause of September 11. Would you tell the hardball audience how they view that event?
Well, during the trial, they submitted some DVDs, and for the life of us, we can't figure out why they did it, but one of the DVDs starts out as a cartoon with bin Laden flying their airplanes into the World Trade Towers, and then it goes to actual footage of people jumping to their deaths while they're sitting there saying that they all deserve to die. Even the mother with the pregnant deserved to die. And at the very end, there's a woman on there with a big smile on her face saying, thank God for 9/11.
So in other words, by this thought process, if it could be called that, September 11 was caused by an angry God who led al-Qaeda to fly airplanes into the buildings, the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, Shanksville, PA, to seek retribution against the U.S. because of our leniency toward homosexuals. And that's the same causal connection for the passing of your son on a battlefield in Iraq.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
What would you say, allow me to play devil's advocate, what would you say, sir, to those who find this repugnant, because I think we all find it absolutely despicable, but would make the case that your son gave his life so that this form of protest, as vile as it might be, could continue?
No, I don't buy that. My son didn't die for that. You know, hundreds of thousands of people have died in the history of this country. And what an insult to those people that have died to protect such a precious freedom.
And I would add to that, Mr. Snyder, that, you know, there are plenty of instances where speech gets regulated in this defamation, obscenity, shouting fire in a theater, so-called fighting words. I mean, there are any number of instances where there have been restrictions recognized on speech. And my argument, and I know your lawyer will capably say this to the Supreme Court, is that you had a right for a private gathering, your right to peaceably assemble and worship at the time of the funeral service, the mass of Christian burial for your boy.
That's correct. The thing that really matters here too, Michael, is, you know, we're private citizens. I mean, you know, we're not public figures. Even if you are a public figure, I don't agree with what they're doing. But the Fourth Circuit did not even take into consideration that, you know, we were private citizens. We had rights too. That, you know, what about my rights to bury Matt, you know, at my church? What about my religious freedoms?
I want to show you, Mr. Snyder. Allow me to show you, sir, if I may, an email that I received this week from one of Pastor Phelps' daughters after I wrote about the Supreme Court accepting your case. Here's what she wanted to say to me. It says, in part, "It's evident you've been convicted in your heart since that day, given that you're still stomping your twinkle-toed, girlish foot in objection." And then it goes on, quote, "Meanwhile, all your ranting and raving and mic cutting and trying to screamingly control the dialogue like the freak you are changes nothing. You still have a duty to obey God, little girl," she said to me. And in one more part it reads, "Ninnies like you have filled up the airwaves with undisciplined lies about the Lord your God and taken captivity a lot of silly women of both genders in this nation." I'm not Freud, but if you read between the lines, it's all about hang-ups over sexuality.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the problem is there with them, Chris. You know, I hear that they're really glad that this is going before the Supreme Court, yet they submitted a brief to the Supreme Court asking them not to hear the case. So I don't know what their psychobabble is about most of the time.
Mr. Snyder, one other aspect of this case that I think we should make clear, there have been some bikers who have done a service at funerals like that for your son, motorcycle enthusiast patriots who've come out and have created a buffer between the folks from the Westboro Baptist Church and families who unfortunately find themselves in a position such as you have found yourself, who are trying to worship and enjoy a private moment. Will you speak to that?
Yeah, the Patriot Guard. I always tell people they were like the angels that came the day of Matt's funerals. They were very good to us.
How did you keep your composure? I mean, how did you not get out of the hearse and physically?
Chris,
yeah, go ahead.
It was about Matt, you know, and I really did at the church and all. It was about Matt, and that's what I was concentrating on at that time.
I mean, I would say, Mr. Snyder, that one of the additional reasons that I hope you're successful in front of the United States Supreme Court is to keep the peace, because you, sir, showed tremendous restraint. And I don't think it's a leap of faith to wonder if everyone could exhibit that level of restraint at a time when they're burying a loved one and are confronted by this insanity.
Well, Mike, one day they're going to run into the wrong person, and that person is going to go off, and when they do, I hope it doesn't affect an innocent person. Some of the places they've gone to, they've had bottles and bricks thrown through their car windows. I mean, it's violent, and somebody's going to get hurt if somebody doesn't do something about it.
Thank you, Al Snyder, and again, our condolences on the passing of your son, a hero, back in 2006.
Thank you, Michael.